My name is Marcus, and I'm 23 years old. If you're watching this, you probably want to hear about what happened at that abandoned farm, about what I found in that well that changed everything. But to understand why I ended up there in the first place, you need to know where I came from. You need to know about the reformatory, about the mistakes I made, and about the kind of person I was before that day. Because the truth is, I wasn't always someone you'd want to meet in a dark alley. I wasn't always someone who cared about right or wrong, but that discovery, it showed me things about myself I never knew existed. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a neighborhood where people minded their own business because getting involved meant trouble. My mom worked 2 jobs just to keep our small apartment, and my dad, well, he left when I was 7. I don't remember much about him except the smell of cigarettes and the sound of the door slamming that last time. Mom tried her best, she really did, but I was angry. Angry at my dad for leaving, angry at the world for being unfair, angry at myself for not being enough to make him stay. That anger festered inside me like a wound that never healed, and by the time I was 15, I was running with the wrong crowd. There was this group of guys older than me who seemed to have it all figured out. They had money, they had respect in the neighborhood, and they didn't take garbage from anyone. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to feel powerful instead of powerless, so I started doing small jobs for them, lookout work mostly, standing on corners and texting warnings when cops drove by. It felt exciting at first, like I was part of something bigger than myself, like I mattered. But small jobs turned into bigger ones, and before I knew it, I was in way over my head. The night everything fell apart, I was 17. We were supposed to break into a warehouse, just grab some electronics and get out. Simple, they said. Easy money, they said. But someone had tipped off the police, and we walked right into a trap. I remember the lights, the sirens, the way my heart hammered in my chest as I ran. I remember thinking I could outrun them, that I was fast enough, smart enough, but I wasn't. They caught me 3 blocks away, face down on the pavement, handcuffs digging into my wrists while they read me my rights. The trial was quick. My public defender was overworked and underpaid, and I didn't have much of a defense anyway. They caught me red-handed. The judge looked at me like I was already a lost cause, like he'd seen 1,000 kids just like me and knew exactly how my story would end. He sentenced me to 4 years in a juvenile reformatory, and I remember my mum crying in the courtroom, her face in her hands, and feeling absolutely nothing. I'd gone numb by then. Numb to the disappointment, numb to the consequences, numb to everything. The reformatory was exactly what you'd imagine. Cold concrete walls, metal beds, the constant sound of doors clanging shut. The first few months were the hardest. I got into fights, spent time in solitary, built up walls around myself that nobody could penetrate. But then something shifted. There was this counselor, Mr. Patterson, who refused to give up on me. He'd sit outside my cell during solitary and just talk about his own life, about the mistakes he'd made, about how he'd turned things around. At first, I ignored him, but slowly, over months, his words started to sink in. He got me into the education program, helped me get my GED, encouraged me to read, and I discovered something surprising. I actually liked learning. I devoured books, anything I could get my hands on. History, science, novels about people who'd overcome impossible odds. Reading became my escape, but more than that, it became my window into understanding that the world was bigger than my anger, bigger than my mistakes. Mr. Patterson used to say that our past doesn't define us unless we let it, and for the first time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could be someone different. I served 3.5 years before they released me on good behavior. I was 21 years old, standing outside the reformatory gates with a small duffel bag containing everything I owned and absolutely no idea what to do next. My mum had moved to Arizona during my sentence, trying to start fresh, and she'd made it clear in her letters that while she loved me, she needed space. She needed to heal from everything I'd put her through. I understood. I didn't blame her. So I started walking. No destination in mind, just moving forward because standing still felt like going backwards. I wandered for weeks, hitchhiking through Oregon and into Northern California, doing odd jobs for cash, sleeping in shelters or under bridges when I had to. People looked at me with suspicion when they found out about my record. Doors closed before they even opened. But I kept moving, kept trying, because what else was I supposed to do? Give up? Go back to my old life? That wasn't an option anymore. I'd changed too much, seen too much, learned too much about who I could be. It was late September when I found myself walking along a dusty rural road outside a small town called Willowbrook in Northern California. The kind of place that probably had more cows than people, where everyone knew everyone else's business, and strangers stood out like sore thumbs. I'd been walking for hours, my feet aching in worn-out sneakers, my stomach growling because I hadn't eaten since the previous morning when a kind waitress at a diner had slipped me some leftover pancakes. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and I knew I needed to find somewhere to sleep before darkness fell completely. That's when I saw it. Set back from the road, almost hidden behind overgrown trees and wild bushes, was an old wooden gate hanging off its hinges. Beyond it, I could make out what looked like an abandoned farm. The main house was a two-story structure with peeling white paint and broken windows, its porch sagging like a tired old man. There was a barn off to one side, its roof partially collapsed, and various outbuildings scattered around the property in different states of decay. Everything was overgrown with weeds and wild grass that came up to my waist in places. It looked like nobody had lived there in years, maybe decades. I stood at that gate for a long moment, debating with myself. Trespassing was technically a crime, and I couldn't afford to get in trouble again. One more mark on my record, and I'd be looking at serious jail time as an adult. But the sun was setting fast, and the next town was probably miles away. I told myself I'd just sleep in the barn, leave at first light, and nobody would ever know I'd been there. So I squeezed through the broken gate and made my way up the overgrown driveway, my footsteps crunching on gravel and dried leaves. The barn seemed like the safest option. The house looked unstable, like it might collapse if you breathed on it wrong, but the barn, despite its damaged roof, still had 3 solid walls and plenty of old hay that would make decent bedding. I pulled open the heavy barn door, wincing at the loud creak it made, and stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately, that distinctive scent of old hay, rust, and years of neglect. Dust particles danced in the last rays of sunlight, filtering through gaps in the walls. There was an old tractor in one corner, covered in rust and cobwebs, and various farming tools hung on the walls or lay scattered across the floor. I made myself a little nest in one corner, using some of the driest hay I could find, using my duffel bag as a pillow. As I lay there watching the last light fade, I thought about Mr. Patterson and what he'd say if he could see me now. Probably something about how every journey has rough patches, how the road to redemption isn't a straight line. I missed those conversations more than I'd expected. He'd been the first person in years who'd believed I could be more than my worst mistakes. I must have fallen asleep quickly, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight was streaming through the gaps in the barn walls, and birds were singing outside. I sat up, brushing hay off my clothes, and realized I was incredibly thirsty. My water bottle had been empty since yesterday afternoon. I remembered seeing what looked like an old well in the yard when I'd arrived last night, near a cluster of dead fruit trees. Maybe it still had water. It was worth checking. I stepped out of the barn into the cool morning air and stretched, taking in the property in full daylight. It was even more run down than I'd realized. The house looked like it had been beautiful once, probably back in the 1950s or 60s, with its wraparound porch and big windows. But time and neglect had reduced it to a skeleton of its former self. Vines grew up the sides, windows were shattered, and part of the roof had caved in. It made me sad somehow, thinking about the family that must have lived here once, the dreams they must have had for this place. The well was exactly where I remembered, about 50 feet from the house, surrounded by cracked concrete and covered with a wooden lid that had partially rotted away. I approached it cautiously, not sure if the structure was even stable. The well itself was made of old bricks, arranged in a circle about 4 feet across, and when I peered over the edge, I couldn't see the bottom. It disappeared into darkness. I picked up a small rock and dropped it in, listening. It took a long time before I heard the distant splash, which meant the well was deep, really deep. I was about to give up on the idea of getting water when I noticed something odd. There was a rope tied to one of the support beams, leading down into the well. It looked newer than everything else, like it had been placed there relatively recently. My curiosity got the better of me. Why would someone put a new rope in an abandoned well? I grabbed the rope and pulled, testing its strength. It held firm. There was definitely something attached to the other end, something heavy. Hand over hand, I pulled up the rope. It was exhausting work, and my arms were burning by the time I saw what was coming up from the darkness. It was a large waterproof bag, the kind people use for camping or boating, sealed tight with heavy-duty clips. My heart started racing. What could possibly be down there? Money? Drugs? A body? All the possibilities ran through my mind as I hauled the bag up and over the edge of the well, dropping it onto the ground with a heavy thud. I stared at that bag for a full minute, my hands shaking slightly. Every instinct I developed in the reformatory was screaming at me to walk away, to leave whatever this was alone, and get as far from this place as possible. Nothing good came from finding mysterious bags in abandoned wells. But human curiosity is a powerful thing, and before I could talk myself out of it, I was kneeling beside the bag, unclipping the fasteners. Inside wasn't money or drugs. It was papers, stacks and stacks of papers, all sealed in plastic bags to protect them from moisture. But not just any papers. These were documents, photographs, letters, and what looked like legal files. I pulled out one of the plastic bags and opened it carefully. The first thing I saw was a photograph of a young woman, maybe 19 or 20 years old, with long blonde hair and a bright smile. She was standing in front of this very farm, back when it was beautiful and well-maintained. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Sarah, Summer, 1987. Hey, if you're enjoying this story so far, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know, and honestly, this channel is all about sharing real stories that make us think about our own lives and choices. Also, I'm curious, what would you do if you found something mysterious like this? Would you investigate or walk away? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I love hearing from you guys. Your perspectives always teach me something new. Now let me tell you what else was in that bag, because trust me, it gets so much more intense from here. I sat there on the ground next to that well, spreading out the contents of the bag around me like pieces of a puzzle I didn't understand yet. There were dozens of photographs, all of the same young woman, Sarah, at different ages and in different places. Some showed her as a little girl, maybe 8 or 9, playing in the yard of this farm with a dog. Others showed her as a teenager, sitting on the porch steps, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. And then there were the ones from later, where that smile had disappeared entirely, replaced by something that looked like fear. Mixed in with the photographs were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to various people. Some were to someone named Detective Morrison at the Willowbrook Police Department. Others were addressed to a lawyer in Sacramento, a few to a women's shelter in San Francisco, and several to a person named Jennifer, who appeared to be Sarah's sister. I started reading them, and with each letter, the story became clearer and more disturbing. Sarah had been trying to escape. She'd been documenting abuse, collecting evidence, building a case against someone, but I couldn't tell who from the letters alone. Then I found the journal. It was a small, leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with neat handwriting in blue ink. The first entry was dated June 3rd, 1985, and it started simply enough. "Mum says I should keep a diary to help with my thoughts. Dad's been drinking more lately. Mom pretends not to notice, but I see the way she flinches when he raises his voice. I flipped through the pages, watching as the entries became darker, more desperate. By 1987, Sarah was writing about bruises she had to hide, about her father's rage, about her mother's inability or unwillingness to protect her. But it wasn't just about her father. As I read deeper into the journal, another name kept appearing: Robert Henshaw, the son of a wealthy family in town who owned the bank and half the businesses in Willowbrook. Sarah had started dating him when she was 18, and at first, the entries about him were happy, full of hope. He was her escape plan, her ticket out of an abusive home. But within months, the tone changed. Robert was controlling, jealous, violent. He isolated her from her friends, monitored where she went, who she talked to, and when she tried to break up with him, he threatened her. The entry from March 1988 made my blood run cold. Robert said if I ever leave him, he'll make sure nobody finds me. He said his family has connections, that the police won't help me. I believe him. I'm so scared. The last entry in the journal was dated September 15, 1988. It was just one line: "I'm leaving tonight. If anyone finds this, please tell Jenny I love her and I'm sorry I couldn't say goodbye." That was it. Nothing after that. I sat back, my mind racing. What happened to Sarah? Did she escape? Was she still alive? And why was all of this hidden in a well on an abandoned farm? I dug deeper into the bag and found what looked like legal documents. There were copies of police reports, but they'd been filed under a different name: Jane Doe. Someone had tried to make Sarah disappear from the official record. There were also bank statements showing large withdrawals from Robert Henshaw's accounts around the same time as that last journal entry. And then I found something that made my stomach drop. A newspaper clipping from October 1988. The headline read, "Local woman missing, family fears the worst." The article was about Sarah Thompson, 21 years old, who had vanished without a trace. Her sister Jennifer was quoted, saying she believed Sarah had been murdered, but that the police weren't taking her seriously because of the Henshaw family's influence. I felt sick. I was holding evidence of something terrible, possibly a murder that had been covered up for over 35 years. But I was also an ex-convict with a record, sitting on private property, handling what could be evidence in a criminal case. If I went to the police, would they even believe me? Or would they assume I was involved somehow, that I'd done something to Sarah? My mind went to all the worst-case scenarios, all the ways this could go wrong for me. But then I thought about Sarah. I thought about that scared young woman who tried so hard to escape, who documented everything because she knew nobody would believe her without proof. I thought about her sister Jennifer, who'd probably spent decades wondering what happened, probably still wondering. And I thought about Mr. Patterson telling me that redemption isn't about running from hard things, it's about doing the right thing, even when it's terrifying. I carefully packed everything back into the waterproof bag, making sure nothing got damaged. Then I pulled out my phone, which I'd been keeping off to save battery, and turned it on. I had 1 bar of service, barely enough. I did a quick internet search for Sarah Thompson missing 1988 Willowbrook, California, and found several old articles about the case. They all said basically the same thing. She disappeared. There were rumors about Robert Henshaw's involvement, but nothing was ever proven, and the case went cold. Robert had died in a car accident in 2003, and his family had sold most of their properties and left town years ago. But one article from just 2 years ago caught my attention. It was from a true crime blog that specialized in cold cases. The author had interviewed Jennifer Thompson, Sarah's sister, who was now 58 years old and still living in Northern California. Jennifer was still searching for answers, still hoping that someday someone would find evidence that could give her closure. The article included Jennifer's email address for anyone with information about Sarah's disappearance. I stared at that email address for a long time. This was it. This was the moment where I had to decide what kind of person I was going to be. I could repack this bag, lower it back down the well and walk away. Nobody would ever know I'd been here. I could continue my wandering, keep my head down, avoid any potential trouble, or I could do something that might complicate my life enormously, but would potentially give a grieving sister the answers she'd been searching for decades. My hands were shaking as I composed an email on my phone. I kept it simple. My name is Marcus Chen. I found something at an abandoned farm outside Willowbrook that I think belonged to your sister Sarah. There are documents, photos, and a journal. I think you need to see this. Please let me know how I can get this to you safely. I included my phone number and hit send before I could change my mind. I didn't expect a response right away. It was only 8 in the morning, and for all I knew, Jennifer didn't check that email account regularly. So I decided to explore the property more while I waited to see if there were any other clues about what had happened here. The house was too dangerous to enter. Parts of the floor had rotted through, but I walked around the perimeter, looking through windows. In what must have been the living room, I could see old furniture still in place, covered in decades of dust and debris from the collapsed ceiling. There were picture frames on the walls, their glass broken, but I could make out family photos. I recognized Sarah in several of them, always standing slightly apart from everyone else. Her body language closed off. In the kitchen, dishes still sat in the sink, as if the family had just walked away mid-meal. It was eerie, like a snapshot frozen in time. Behind the house I found an old storm cellar, its wooden doors half buried in dirt and leaves. I almost walked past it, but something made me stop. I cleared away the debris and pulled open one of the doors. Stone steps led down into darkness. Using my phone's flashlight, I descended carefully, not sure what I'd find. The cellar was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with stone walls and a dirt floor. It looked like it had been used for storage at some point. There were empty mason jars on crude shelves and old farming equipment in one corner. But in the far corner, partially hidden behind some rotted wooden crates, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Scratched into the stone wall, in letters that must have taken hours to carve, were the words, "Sarah was here. Robert locked me in. If I die, he killed me. Tell Jenny I love her." I stood in that cellar, my phone's flashlight illuminating those desperate words carved into stone, and I felt tears stinging my eyes. This wasn't just a cold case anymore. This was real. Sarah had been here, in this very spot, trapped and terrified, knowing she might die. She'd used what must have been a nail or a piece of metal to scratch her final message into the wall, a message that had waited 36 years to be found. I took several photos of the carving, making sure every word was clearly visible, and then I got out of that cellar as fast as I could. I needed air. I needed to think. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me so badly I almost dropped it. It was a text from an unknown number. "This is Jennifer Thompson. I got your email. Are you serious? Do you really have Sarah's things? Please tell me this isn't some kind of cruel joke." My hands were shaking as I typed back, "It's real. I found a waterproof bag in the well at the old farm. It has her journal, photos, letters and documents. And I found something else. There's writing carved into the wall of the storm cellar. I think she was held there." The response came within seconds. "Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm in Sacramento. I can be there in 3 hours. Can you meet me? Please don't leave. Please don't let anyone else find this first. The Henshaw family still has people in Willowbrook. We have to be careful." I texted back my agreement and she sent me the address of a diner in the next town over, about 5 miles down the road. She said to meet her there at noon, that she'd bring someone from the state police cold case unit, someone she'd been working with for years, who she trusted completely. I had 3 hours to kill, and suddenly this abandoned farm felt different. It wasn't just a place to sleep anymore. It was a crime scene. It was the last place Sarah had been before she disappeared. I walked the property more carefully now, looking for anything else that might be important. Near the collapsed barn, I found what looked like an old fire pit, and when I poked around in the ashes and dirt with a stick, I found several buttons and a metal zipper that might have been from clothing. Someone had burned something here, and given the location near the cellar, it didn't take much imagination to guess what. I also noticed tire tracks. old ones mostly covered by grass and weeds, but some that looked newer, maybe a few weeks old. Someone had been coming to this property, even though it was abandoned. Maybe Robert Henshaw before he died, checking to make sure his secrets stayed buried. Or maybe someone else, someone who knew what had happened here and was making sure the evidence stayed hidden. That thought made me nervous. What if someone saw me here? What if they were watching right now? I went back to the barn to get my duffel bag, and that's when I noticed something I'd missed in the darkness last night. There were scratches on the barn floor, like something heavy had been dragged across it. I followed the marks to a corner where several old feed bags were piled up. When I moved them aside, I found a trap door, its edges barely visible under decades of dirt and grime. My heart was pounding as I pulled it open. There was a ladder leading down into what looked like a root cellar or storage space beneath the barn. I climbed down slowly, using my phone light to see. The space was small and cramped, maybe 6 feet deep, with a dirt floor and stone walls. And there, in the far corner, I saw them. Bones. Human bones, partially covered by dirt, along with scraps of fabric that might have once been clothing. A skull grinned up at me from the shadows, and I had to fight the urge to vomit. I'd found Sarah. After 36 years, I'd found her. I climbed out of that hole faster than I'd ever moved in my life, my whole body shaking. I sat outside the barn in the sunlight, trying to calm down, trying to process what I'd just seen. Sarah had never left this farm. She'd never escaped. Robert Henshaw had killed her and hidden her body here. And then he'd gone on living his life for another 15 years before dying in that car accident. He'd gotten away with murder. I should have called 911 right then. I should have reported finding human remains. But I was terrified. I was an ex-con with a record, alone on private property, with a dead body. Every cop show I'd ever watched, every story I'd heard about people being wrongly accused, it all came flooding back. What if they didn't believe me? What if they thought I was involved? I needed Jennifer there. I needed a witness, someone who could vouch for me, someone who the police would believe. So I waited. I sat on the porch of that ruined farmhouse, the waterproof bag beside me, checking my phone every few minutes, even though I knew it was still hours until noon. I thought about Sarah, about the life she never got to live. She'd be 57 years old now if she'd survived, maybe with kids of her own, maybe with a career she loved. Instead, she died at 21, murdered by a man who claimed to love her, buried in a shallow grave beneath a barn, forgotten by everyone except her sister. I thought about my own mum, about how much I'd put her through with my bad choices and my anger. At least she got to see me change. At least she knew I was trying to be better. Jennifer never got that. She never got closure, never got to say goodbye, never got to know for certain what happened to her sister. And I was about to change that, for better or worse. At 11 o'clock, I couldn't wait anymore. I packed up the waterproof bag, took one last look at the farm, and started walking toward town. It took me about an hour to reach the diner, a small place called Rosie's with faded red vinyl booths and a neon sign that flickered. I went inside, ordered a coffee I couldn't really afford, and sat in a booth near the window where I could watch the parking lot. My leg bounced nervously under the table, and I must have checked my phone 100 times. At exactly noon, a silver sedan pulled into the parking lot. A woman got out, tall and thin, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Even from a distance, I could see the resemblance to the photos of Sarah. This was Jennifer. There was a man with her, mid-50s, wearing casual clothes but carrying himself like law enforcement. They looked around the parking lot, and when Jennifer's eyes met mine through the window, she knew. She just knew it was me. They came inside, and Jennifer walked straight to my booth, her eyes red like she'd been crying the whole drive. "Marcus," she said, her voice shaking. I nodded and stood up. She looked at the waterproof bag on the seat next to me, and her hand went to her mouth. "Is that really her stuff?" I nodded again, not trusting my voice. The man with her extended his hand. "I'm Detective James Richardson, State Police Cold Case Unit. Jennifer told me about your email." Can you tell us exactly what you found? So I told them everything. About wandering after my release from the reformatory, about finding the abandoned farm, about pulling the bag from the well, about reading Sarah's journal and finding the message carved in the cellar wall. And then I told them about the bones in the root cellar beneath the barn. Jennifer broke down, sobbing when I said that, and Detective Richardson put a hand on her shoulder while pulling out his phone to call for backup and a forensics team. "You did the right thing, son," he said to me, his voice serious but kind. "I know this must be scary for you given your record, but you did exactly the right thing. Sarah's family has been waiting for answers for 36 years. You gave them that." Jennifer looked up at me through her tears and reached across the table to grab my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not walking away. Thank you for caring about a stranger. Thank you for giving me my sister back." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Detective Richardson called in a full forensics team, the county sheriff's department, and what seemed like half the state police. The abandoned farm became a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape, swarming with investigators in white coveralls. They photographed everything, documented the well, the cellar, the barn, and the remains. I had to give multiple statements, telling my story over and over to different people, each time worried they'd decide I was somehow involved. But Detective Richardson kept his word. He vouched for me, explained the timeline, made it clear I'd only arrived the day before and had done the right thing by coming forward. Jennifer stayed by my side through most of it, like she was afraid if she let me out of her sight, this would all turn out to be a dream. She held that waterproof bag like it was the most precious thing in the world, carefully looking through each photograph, each letter, crying over her sister's journal. "I knew," she kept saying. "I always knew Robert had killed her, but nobody would listen. His family had too much money, too much influence. The police barely investigated. They treated Sarah like she was just another runaway, like she didn't matter." Detective Richardson told us that with the evidence I'd found, combined with the remains, they could finally build a case. Even though Robert Henshaw was dead and couldn't face trial, there could be others who'd helped cover up the crime or who'd known about it and said nothing. The investigation would be reopened, and this time it would be done right. Sarah would finally get justice, even if it was 36 years late. As the sun started to set, Detective Richardson pulled me aside. "Marcus, I need to be straight with you about something," he said. "Your past is going to come up. The media is going to get hold of this story, and they're going to dig into who you are and where you came from. Some people might question your motives or suggest you had something to do with this beyond just finding the evidence. Are you prepared for that?" I nodded slowly. I thought about that possibility. "I can't control what people think about me," I said. "All I can do is tell the truth. I found something, and I did the right thing. That's all." He smiled at that, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You know, I've been doing this job for 28 years, and I've seen a lot of people in your situation, people with records trying to turn their lives around. Most of them struggle because society doesn't give second chances easily. But what you did today, that takes real character. That takes courage. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're less than because of your past. You're exactly the kind of person this world needs more of." Those words meant more to me than he probably realized. For so long, I'd been defined by my worst moment, by that warehouse break-in when I was 17. I'd carried that shame like a weight around my neck, convinced that no matter what I did, I'd always be a criminal in everyone's eyes. But here was a decorated detective, someone who devoted his life to catching criminals, telling me I had character and courage. Maybe redemption really was possible. Maybe I really could be more than my mistakes. Jennifer drove me to a motel in the next town over, insisting on paying for a room for the week and giving me some cash for food. "I can never repay you for what you've done," she said as we sat in the motel parking lot, "but I want to help you get back on your feet. Do you have plans, family, somewhere you're trying to get to?" I admitted I didn't really have a plan beyond wandering and hoping something would work out. She thought for a moment, then said, "I run a small construction company in Sacramento. Nothing fancy, but we do good work. If you're interested, I could use someone reliable. It's hard physical work, but it pays decent, and I'd help you find a place to live." I stared at her, hardly believing what I was hearing. A job. A real job, with someone who knew my history and was offering anyway. "Why would you do that for me?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "Because Sarah would have wanted me to. She was always helping people, always believing in second chances. And because you gave me something I never thought I'd have, closure. Let me give you something in return, a chance to build a real future." The story broke 3 days later. Decades-old cold case solved, missing woman's remains found, read the headlines. My name was in the articles along with my background. Some of the comments online were harsh, people questioning why an ex-con was wandering around abandoned properties, suggesting I must have been up to something illegal. But there were also people defending me, praising what I'd done, calling me a hero. I tried not to read too much of it. I'd learned in the reformatory that you can't control what people think about you. You can only control your own actions. The forensics came back positive. The remains were confirmed to be Sarah Thompson, and the evidence suggested she'd been murdered sometime in September 1988, exactly when she disappeared. The investigation uncovered that 2 other people had likely been involved in covering up the crime, both of them friends of Robert Henshaw, both now elderly but still alive. They were arrested and charged as accessories after the fact. Jennifer got to give Sarah a proper funeral, finally bringing her sister home after all those years. I moved to Sacramento 2 weeks later and started working for Jennifer's construction company. The work was hard, just like she'd warned, framing houses in the California heat, but it felt good to be doing something productive with my hands. My co-workers knew about my past. Jennifer had been upfront with everyone, but they judged me on my work ethic, not my mistakes. Slowly, I started building a life. I got my own small apartment, started saving money, even enrolled in community college classes at night, thinking maybe I'd study criminal justice or social work, something where I could help other people who'd made mistakes turn their lives around. Mr. Patterson reached out when he heard about what happened. He'd read the news stories and wanted to tell me how proud he was. "You know what the difference is between people who make it after the reformatory and people who don't," he said during our phone call. "It's not about being perfect or never making mistakes again. It's about who you choose to be in the moments that matter. You were alone at that farm. You could have walked away, but you chose to be someone who does the right thing even when it's hard. That's who you really are, Marcus. That's the person you've become." 6 months later, I was invited to speak at a conference about rehabilitation and second chances. I was terrified, standing in front of hundreds of people, many of them criminal justice professionals, social workers, and formerly incarcerated individuals. But I told my story. I talked about the anger that had consumed me as a teenager, about the reformatory, about wandering lost after my release, and about finding Sarah's remains and choosing to come forward despite my fears. I talked about how one choice, one moment of doing the right thing, had changed everything for me. After my talk, dozens of people came up to me. Some were young people with records who felt hopeless about their futures. Others were family members of crime victims who thanked me for giving Jennifer and others like her closure. One older woman hugged me and said her daughter had gone missing 8 years ago, and hearing Sarah's story gave her hope that someday someone might find answers for her too. I still think about that abandoned farm sometimes, about how close I came to just sleeping in that barn and moving on the next morning without ever looking in that well. Life is full of these moments, these crossroads where we choose who we're going to be. We don't always recognize them when they're happening. Sometimes they look like nothing more than a mysterious bag in a well or a decision to send one email. Jennifer and I have become close friends. She says I'm like the little brother she never had, and I've found in her the family support I'd been missing for so long. She's taught me that healing isn't linear, that some wounds never fully close, but that we can still build meaningful lives around our scars. She visits Sarah's grave every week, and sometimes I go with her. We sit there in the quiet cemetery, and she tells me stories about her sister, about the girl Sarah was before the abuse and the fear, about her dreams and her laughter and her kindness. My mom and I have reconnected too. She flew out from Arizona to visit after hearing about everything, and we had the most honest conversation we'd ever had. She apologized for not being there when I got out of the reformatory, and I apologized for all the pain I'd put her through before I went in. We cried together, really cried, and started rebuilding our relationship from a place of honesty and forgiveness. She tells her friends about me now, not with shame, but with pride, talking about how I helped solve a murder case and turned my life around. I'm not going to pretend my life is perfect now, or that all my problems disappeared because of one good deed. I still struggle sometimes. There are still employers who won't hire me because of my record, still people who look at me with suspicion when they learn about my past. Some days are harder than others, days when the old anger tries to creep back in, or when I feel overwhelmed by how much I have to prove. But I've learned that redemption isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's showing up every day and choosing to be a little bit better than you were yesterday. The abandoned farm was eventually torn down. Jennifer bought the property and turned it into a small memorial park dedicated to Sarah and other victims of domestic violence. There's a bench there now, overlooking what used to be the well, with a plaque that reads, Sarah Thompson, 1967-1988. May her story remind us to always choose courage over silence. I visit sometimes, sitting on that bench, thinking about the strange path that brought me there and all the ways my life has changed since. If you're watching this and you're struggling with your own past, with your own mistakes, I want you to know something. You are not defined by the worst thing you've ever done. You are not beyond redemption. It doesn't matter if you've been to prison, if you've hurt people, if you've made choices you regret. What matters is who you choose to be right now in this moment. Every day is a chance to do better, to be better, to choose courage even when you're terrified. And if you're dealing with abuse or violence or someone controlling your life the way Robert Henshaw controlled Sarah's, please know that you deserve better. You deserve safety and freedom and a life without fear. Reach out, tell someone. Keep evidence if you can. Don't let anyone make you disappear. Your life matters. Your story matters. There are people who will believe you and who will fight for you. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way through. It means the world to me that you took the time to listen. If you found this meaningful, if it made you think or feel something, please consider subscribing to this channel. We share real stories about real people facing real challenges, and your support helps us keep doing that. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had a moment where you had to choose between doing what was easy and doing what was right? What did you learn from it? Share your stories with our community because your experiences might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. We're all in this together, trying to figure out life and be better people. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.